didn't you just go somewhere though? Didn't you just go on some trip?
Yeah, that was on the Columbia. The last month I've been down there for probably 3 or 4 days of each week, fishing walleye and
Nice.
yeah, hanging out. And,
I know.
yeah,
You
I
Picnic.
actually
good
I
on.
actually fished like 4 days by me, myself, and I. And
That's all
and I
right.
discovered they're a great bunch of guys, I totally enjoyed my trip. So,
Company than some of your other trips, huh?
yeah, we're all on the same political line of discussion. You don't have to worry about what you say. And they all agree with me. So it makes it real easy.
Totally.
So,
Well, good to see you again.
yeah.
So, I guess I just addressed my eye because I don't know if you can see that. I don't want
Hey,
people.
John, what's going on there?
He wants to act like a tough guy.
I missed her note.
Just so people aren't concerned, but
Yeah.
I had like a lump, like a blocked gland in my eyelid that they went in and removed it. So that was last week, and it's still not looking pretty.
Oh,
What can you?
I almost didn't even notice it until you said something. So now I do.
Maybe if I stretch it out a little bit. All right. So you ready? Get
I think so. Yeah.
plans? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Hopefully John and I are a little better prepared. We got notes and stuff this time. And yeah, because I think it's important, it's an important topic and we just want to be a little better prepared. So let's see how it goes.
Yep.
But I guess I just wanted to start with giving some background of what's going on right now. And because there's still some actions that people can take to put a halt to the things that are going on right now. So we wanted to get this topic out right now. And I mean, there's a bazillion topics we can talk about surrounding public lands, but we're going to try to focus in on one particular thing today. So Congress is moving forward with a massive legislation package and through a process known as budget reconciliation. And this allows the legislative proposals to become law without support from or it allows legislative proposals to become law with support from just the simple majority in the Senate. So takes less votes. So they're trying to get the stuff moving forward that normally wouldn't move forward in the budget reconciliation package. And there's a number of amendments that are concerning. So on May 7th, Republicans and I think one Democrat in the House of Natural Resource Committee submitted their full markup, and I wanted to just list the provisions. We're not going to talk about all the provisions today, but I wanted to list them just so people know what's going on. And if you do wind up contacting your senators or writing them, if any of these things are concerning to you, then, just put them on your radar. So the provisions included reinstating quarterly onshore oil and gas lease sales, mandating at least 30 lease sales in the Gulf of America over the next 15 years and 6 in the Cook Inlet, returning to reasonable oil and gas royalty rates, requiring geothermal lease sales, resuming leasing for energy production in the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska and the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, resuming coal leasing on federal lands, increasing timber sales on federal lands, and requiring long-term timber contracts, and rescinding various wasteful slush funds established under the Biden administration and agencies such as NOAA, the National Park Service, and the Bureau of Land Management. So that's just a list of some of the provisions that the House Natural Resource Committee added to the budget reconciliation. But the one we're going to talk about today is an amendment that they added that could put, I, the numbers aren't quite firmed up, but somewhere around 460,000 acres of public land up for sale. And the amendment was introduced by representatives, and you guys can help me with the name, Mark Amodi, Amade, do you know, Republican in Nevada, and Celeste Mallet, who's a Republican in Utah. And it authorized land sales managed by the Forest Service and BLM. So, when Tim and I were texting about this podcast and what to cover, he mentioned that it would be important to maybe talk about the history of public lands and how we got here. So, Tim, did you want to take off from?
Sure, because a lot of what I'm hearing is um, from some people I know that they see it that if public lands maybe should be transferred to the state for more local control. And I think if a history of all of these land transactions of where federal public lands have been transferred to the states and what happened was known, it'd give a different picture of if you're a user of public lands, do you really want to see that happen?
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, for my own purpose, I'd look at the history of public lands. How did it all start? And the beginning actually falls right back to this Declaration of Independence. And the 4 years following that, they couldn't ratify it's not the Constitution. They couldn't ratify the Articles of Constitution.
Okay.
Because one of the issues that were in play was that you had 6 states that had fixed western boundaries, and you had not states, they were colonies at the time, and you had 7 colonies that had open boundaries to the west. And the 6 states refused to ratify the Articles of Constitution because the 7 states would be dominant because they had all this land west of them. And so to counter that, to finally get an agreement, the 7 states gave up the right to any properties beyond their existing western boundaries, and that all those lands would fall to the new national government. Thus, all of that became public land or became federal public land. And so as the Louisiana Purchase added lands right up to the purchase of Alaska, the gaining of Hawaii, as war with Mexico, gaining of Texas, as all of these lands came into the Union, they became federal public lands. And the use of those public lands were like the Homestead Act, which helped produce settlement westward. You had the Transcontinental Railroad Act, which gave millions of acres of lands to the railroad for producing the railroad, and they were given adjoining lands to north and south of the tracks. And then you had what's called the Morrill Act, which they utilized federal public lands, gave those lands to the states for the development of monetary purchase of universities and higher education, basically improving school systems through the use of whatever could be gained from these what they called trust lands. Mm-hmm. And then there are the lands that were just ceded to states as they gained statehood to get them started. So what happened to lands that fell within the states? The history is that, especially back east, those were the first states that had gained the trust lands. And a lot of those trust lands were immediately sold or traded or given away for monetary purposes, to the point where Congress said this wasn't the intended purpose of these lands. It was supposed to be long generating revenues. And so they placed regulations on those lands. And so, therefore, since a lot of the Western states were formed after the regulations went into effect, the Western states still hold a good amount of the trust lands. However, those trust lands are being used for the purpose of generating revenue for schools, universities. So they're relatively highly industrialized in logging and mineral extraction and oil, gas. It's the other lands that were ceded to those states that you could look at and say, this is a good example of what happens when there's no regulation to what happens to those lands when they come into state ownership. And it varies by state to state, but there's a good example would be Nevada, which was given 2.7 million acres at the formation of statehood. Of those non-trust lands that were given to the state, that 2.7 million acres, it only has 3,000 acres of that left. So
What happened?
those are
What happened to the other acres? What did they do? So they just sold them off?
sold them off. Mineral, I don't know the specifics,
Yeah.
but of those ceded lands to the state when it gained statehood, there are only 3,000 acres of that left
Mhm.
of non-trust lands. So um, those are examples of what can happen, even though it sounds like a good idea. Hey, my state can manage that land at a local level better. History doesn't show that. And the thing I would want to point out also is we live in a time when with climate change and the addition of storms, fire, floods, the cost of managing these lands, especially from a fire standpoint, is increasing all the time. And I think logically you would have to look at if my state suddenly gathers several million acres of property that it now has to manage when it's struggling to manage its own state lands, how does it cover that cost? And it's either through high industrial use of that land or the selling off of that land. So for those that think transferring the land to the states, which would be one of the things in that amendment, for those that think that that would be a positive thing, if you're a user of public lands, hunter, fisherman, hiker, camper, whatever, if you're a recreational user of that public lands, you you need to give that some more thought based on the history of what states do with public lands that have come into their ownership through transfer from the federal government. So that's kind of just kind of a quick history of public lands.
There was also in, do you want to show that book? So I got this book. I don't know if you've had this one, Tim,
I have it.
Lands. Yeah, I got it because I read it in an article and I just started it, but it has some of the history in the beginning. But they're talking about that at one point, federal lands were, the point was for disposal. But then after, I believe it was the Civil War, um, people started seeing the degradation of what people were doing, like uh I think it was is in Minnesota where all the forests were slashed and the landscape turned to a living hell. And then all the
Mhm.
buffalo were gone, and then people started seeing the impacts of what happens to land without somebody protecting it. So there was also that um people started seeing the value in public lands after, like Yeah, they were.
Yeah, that leads us right into like the Theodore Roosevelt administration, where and I have a quote that I'll read at some point in this. If we have time, I would like to, because I read it and it was like, well, it speaks to today probably more so than it did in his time. But it's where
Go ahead, you can read it now. If it fits, go for
it kind of fits. It's too long for me to actually memorize, so
it.
but it goes like this: the defenders of the short-sighted men who, in their greed and selfishness, will, if permitted, rob our country of half its charm by their reckless extermination of all useful and beautiful wild things, sometimes seek to champion them by saying the game belongs to the people. So it does, and not merely to the people now alive, but to the unborn people. The greatest good for the greatest number applies to the number within the womb of time, compared to which those now alive form but an insignificant fraction. Our duty to the whole, including the unborn generations, bids us restrain an unprincipled present day minority from wasting the heritage of these unborn generations. The movement for the conservation of wildlife and the larger movement for the conservation of all our natural resources are essentially democratic in spirit, purpose, and method. And I read that and I thought today that's probably even more prevalent, because not only do we've been blessed with having these public lands for not only our usage to recreate in, but they've benefited us in health, in watershed protection. I mean, how many cities live downhill from upper watersheds?
Mhm.
And I don't know what the percentage is, but a lot of those lands are public lands that hold those watersheds. And the health of many municipal water sources fall in those headlands.
Mhm.
And so that quote applies more to today, in that not only do we have that going on, we have climate change where we need the benefits of the wild places to help the earth heal if we're ever going to survive these major changes. And and so the application to um, today is even greater, um, just for the health of the future generations. And yeah.
Did you have something?
Well, I guess for me, a lot of it has to do with the environmental impact, and it's not necessarily a situation that I have with public lands, but in New Jersey, 3M is being sued by a attorney general in Minnesota and New Jersey. And what they did was they started PFAs, or forever chemicals. This corporation, they started making this in the 50s. In the 60s, they started to realize that it was cancer producing. They still did it. So up until this point in 2000, they said that they were going to stop making this. Basically, it was for non-stick pans, stuff like that.
Teflon.
It's Teflon, and they said they were going to stop doing it in 2025. So they ended up coming to an agreement with the courts that they will pay $285 million this year. The total amount will reach 450 million over the next 25 years. And just to give you an idea, in 2023, 3M's net sales were $32.7 billion. So for 75 years, they allowed these chemicals to be introduced into the environment, and all they have to pay is a pittance comparatively to what they make every year. So they allow these generations of children that are going to be through water, through food, everything that's going to be
Yeah,
involved.
persist in the environment, of
Yeah,
course.
they're going to
Yeah.
persist in the environment. So I guess to me, when you say that, it makes me think of what is the legality behind it, and the attorneys for these states or for their courts were happy about this. But to me, it seems like, is it really the cost worth the effect of, now this wasn't specifically in public lands, but in public lands, it's the same thing. Are we gonna, okay, so the geothermal, what you talked about, fracking is the big way that they want to use geothermal power. So do you want to introduce fracking is over 1,000 chemicals? So is it worth it? Uh, I I don't know. That's just a question that I'm putting out there. So I
Yeah.
guess
I
so.
think what, yeah, I think what you covered lends into something else that's occurring at the same time we're getting these amendments to transfer public lands or sell public lands, is that that comes at the same time the administration is trying to reduce environmental regulations,
Mhm.
um, get rid of the Endangered Species Act. So if these lands become state lands and you no longer have some of the federal regulations that would at least give the federal government some say into how those lands are utilized, we get into those kind of situations. I mean, all of what you just talked about happened with the environmental regulations that we have in place today
Yes.
Yep.
that have benefited us in some ways, but weren't at all strong enough in other ways. So, you know, a corporation is going to weigh the cost of putting in environmental safeguards over the cost of just paying liability fees for a population of people downstream getting cancer.
They're gonna make
So
profits.
that's what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to the bill too, that you were talking about, that they basically introduced at midnight and passed it. And the bill includes language. It allows the industry to pay and bypass judicial review of the NEPA documents. So if they pay 125% of the permitting fees, there's no public oversight or environmental protections. They also, what was it? The environment, there's no repercussions that if they do have spills, that these states can go back after them. That's in the
It's not
provisions.
even the states. It's, I mean, well, it's the communities of people involved. So basically, if these companies pay 125% of the costs associated with either an environmental impact statement or an environmental assessment, they can receive an expedited review, and that shields them from any court oversight. So if, let's say, some, yeah, chemicals get into the water system of a community and they all come down with some type of cancer, they have zero recourse against this. I mean, there's scary stuff going on, right? So,
Yep. Yep.
yeah.
And add to the supposedly these lands would be used for the ability to expand city boundaries for the purpose of housing.
Mhm.
Nevada, Utah. There's a couple things that jump in my mind is that in some of these areas with, again, climate change causing droughts, although the last 2 years have give a reprieve to what was occurring prior. If you fall into future droughts, can these communities sustain the need for water
Mhm.
with additional populations? I mean, are in some of these areas, are we already reaching the maximum population that we should for those areas just because of the demands for resources?
And we
St.
probably,
George, Utah is a perfect
yeah,
example
we've
of,
probably reached the population size of those drought
And so
county.
now you're adding more property.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing that kind of jumps out is people already that live in the outskirts of towns and and cities that are moving into more rural areas because of climate change and the additional of wildfires and such. It's getting nearly impossible to afford home insurance.
Mhm.
So you can build these homes, but will the occupants be able to afford home insurance
Yeah.
because of those? I mean, our insurance have gone up 40%, and we don't even live in a high risk area, but insurance companies are trying to, you know, they're having to pay all these claims in other areas, and so they're having to raise their rates nationwide.
Well,
So
the affordable housing argument that this administration has, like a lot of these lands, some of the lands in Utah are right around Zion National Park, and um, you can't buy a house cheap around a national park. So you can build it, but that doesn't mean it's going to be affordable at all. But yeah, like they're trying to, my, how I'm seeing it is they're trying to make it sound like these are more of the wastelands that nobody cares about, right? But it says, I found something that said many of these lands are popular recreation areas. In southern Utah, the maps include Hurricane Cliffs, the Plateau Passage, long distance bike route, climbing in Corral Canyon Ridge, the Green Valley Race Course, and the Virgin River. So it's not, these are places that people already treasure as beautiful recreation areas and are going to. And I think that our folks need to remember that recreation is a $1 trillion industry, right? So it brings in a lot of money to these counties. I mean, this is why people are flocking there because of the recreation value of these and the scenic value of these places. And I do have some maps I found. It was very hard to find any maps, and I wanted to contact the representatives in Nevada and Utah to ask them for the maps of what they were proposing. But I guess because I'm not a constituent, I'm not allowed to contact one and a different state. So I finally found them online, but I can plop them in. Yeah.
yeah, it takes some searching to get information on this amendment.
It
I
does.
mean, and so I'm glad you brought all this up because a lot of people don't have a picture of what kind of lands they're talking
Yeah, they put the amendment, like John said, in at like almost midnight with no time for the Democrats
about.
to review, no input at all, and it just gets passed.
No public
And
input.
yeah,
Usually there's public input
and I mean,
on-
yeah, so I think people need to know that our public lands are currently under threat to a number of different things. And
Yeah,
yeah, and the sales is just it's looked like it wasn't going to be included in the amendment or in the budget reconciliation package, and then they snuck it in at the 12th hour or the 11th hour, or whatever you call it. So, yeah,
so there's still time
it,
because
there is still
because it hasn't passed with the big beautiful bill, so to speak, out of
it.
the House, and
Mhm.
still has to go through the Senate. So we still have time to contact our state representatives in Congress and our senators.
Yep.
So
The conservative Republicans are holding that up right now because otherwise we would be in trouble.
yes, yes, the bill's being held for other reasons, but it gives
Yeah,
us time.
Gives time,
and I
exactly.
think it's important for people to realize, like I did the same thing as you did, Tim. We talked about it on the last podcast that I contacted my Democratic senators, but we are preaching to the choir. There's not much they can do about it. So it's really, constituents who have Republican representatives who care about these issues. And you can write, but calling is so much more impactful if you got the cojones to do it. Um, and make the argument for what you're passionate about, because they have to respond to you. And if you're on a call. if you write, they can get their canned answer out to you and say good enough is good enough. But if we have enough people calling in and yeah, making us ourselves heard, that would be a great thing. And I know not a lot of people are watching this, but hopefully somehow it picks up some steam and people share it and get the
Yeah.
message out because it's super important stuff. It's yeah, things I really care about, and I think most people do. And also, Zinke, Republican Montana, he has a what is it, an act out, HR 718, public lands and public hands. So you can also share, if you're supportive of that act, with your senators when you call. And that's basically prohibits DOI and the Department of Ag from transferring federal lands greater than 300 acres if accessible by public roads, trails, easement, or public right-of-way, or over 5 acres if accessible by public waterways. So, and unless, prior congressional approval. So trying to put a little bit of a halt. I don't know the ins and outs of that act, but something to look into as well.
And
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I hadn't heard that
Yeah.
yet.
it's
So
good to note that Zinke was also the Secretary
Of
of the Interior in Trump's
yeah.
last 4 years, his first 4 years, I
Yeah,
should
his
say.
first 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a bipartisan bill, actually. It's
Yeah. What's his name? Gabe Vasquez,
Gabe Vasquez,
Democrat.
Democrat out of New Mexico. So it's a that is a good thing, and he is one for keeping. He does not think, just as you spoke earlier, that the states have the capability to take these lands over. They're going to. His view is that they're going to sell them to pay taxes. So.
mhm. And I think that's an example too of I know his state is highly supportive of, I mean, their legislature, state legislature, had introduced bills to try to take in federal public lands into state ownership. And the people
Rebelled.
rebelled, yeah. And so I think that's a good example of even though he's Republican, conservative, he understands that in his state, people are very much against giving up federal public lands. And so the same thing has to apply nationwide if we want to protect them. Is again, we
Yeah.
let our wishes known, and
One of the things I
our
want to mention
representatives know.
popped into my head too about this sale of public lands is that in the past, the sale of public lands, any it usually was some type of exchange for land of maybe higher conservation value or something like that. And if it was sold, that money went into a pot of money back into conservation, public lands, the environment, not into the general treasury. Now, what they want to do is use the money for public lands sales to basically put into the tax bill. Is that what it is, Tim? That's
To reduce the deficit. Yeah,
reduce the deficit,
supposedly reduce the deficit.
Yeah,
So
that's a
that
yeah, I want to say something. Go ahead, you go first.
well, I was going to say
I got
that's
something too.
that's exactly why the quote from Theodore Roosevelt rings so loud to me today. Is that it's so short-sighted. You're doing something for today's people,
Yeah.
not thinking of the future, not thinking of future generations. And we've all benefited from the protection of these public lands. Why on earth does an administration that comes in to power have the right to say those future generations don't get that same benefit that we do.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. What did you want to say?
Basically just wanted to talk about the new Secretary of Interior. And his name is Doug Burgum, and he was the governor of North Dakota. Forbes named him America's best entrepreneurial governor.
Mm.
So when he came in, the first thing that he talked about was these in quotations, drill baby drill and mine baby mine. So the Department of Interior, its mission is to protect and manage the nation's natural resources and cultural heritage, provide scientific and other information about those resources. So you have a secretary who is not very aligned with the mission of the Department of Interior. Um, Going back to what you were saying about paying down the debt, between 2012 and 2022, the royalties that were paid from mining and you, waters, um, and what else?
Extraction.
Extraction
Just general.
was $75 billion from 2012 to 2022. Right now, the national debt is 36.21 trillion. So over 10 years, it was $7.5 billion. How much revenue are we actually going to make? And they're trying to lower the percentage,
Yeah.
right? That the
Yeah.
corporations have to pay.
Yeah, so the
So
royalty rate. So I brought that up. That was one of the provisions. So in the Biden administration, they increased royalty rates from 12.75% to 16.67%. Now they want to lower it back to 12.5%. And now, so this bothers me a little bit because yeah, so that 12.5% is way below market value.
for these lands to be used by the corporations,
Yeah.
right? That's
And taxpayers will once again lose billions in potential revenue and then also have to shoulder the cleanup cost, which we always do. So there's more money. And these the oil and gas people, they only $1.50 to $2 per acre is what they lease for oil and gas. So we're not getting much money at all. And so if the administration's highest priority is to get down our debt, why are they decreasing the royalty rates and the amount of money that these corporations, extractive industries have to pay? You got to ask yourself that question, right? I keep scratching my head. Like, this doesn't seem to make sense. Like, at least if you're going to sell it, get us
top.
the top dollar for if you're going to, because this is a national emergency. Trump likes to call everything emergencies so we can get everything pushed along quickly.
Well, that's how he does it through the executive branch.
Yeah, no, I know. It's just yeah, I
no,
forgot.
I hear what you're saying. And I think if you ask yourself that question, you kind of already know what the answer is.
Yeah.
So
And then yeah, so what did he say? Let's see. Yeah, so Secretary Burgum actually said at a staff-wide meeting that the revenue that the Department of Interior pulled in from lease fees and royalties from grazing, drilling, and logging on federal lands, as well as entrance fees at national parks, was about $18 billion. He said this isn't a big number if we're managing 100 trillion in assets. So then again, why aren't we charging fair market value for this country's precious natural resources, right? It's crazy.
mhm.
And then also, if you talk to your congressional people, if you call, like if you're willing, I'm willing to pay more to recreate. I'm willing to pay more to protect our lands. Like, give me the opportunity to make up some of these funds we're missing in our country, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I'm certainly willing to pay more fees to go into these places and keep them protected for the future.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Um, the states do it. They have access fees, they have parking fees, they have on wildlife areas and things like that. So, no, I totally agree with that.
And then, yeah,
So,
I mean, he was talking about Secretary Burgum and he read the mission of the Department of Interior, but like, I think this is worth people hearing that one of Burgum's first actions as Interior Secretary was February 3rd's Secretary Order 3418, which gave department officials 15 whole days to develop an action plan that would suspend, revise, or rescind protections for federal lands, especially those with fossil fuel development potential. And one of the incoming Congress's first act was a rule change that relieves the House of Representatives of lost revenue if it gives federal lands to states and other interests. So there's a well orchestrated something going on
mhm,
here that I
yes.
think is worth noting. Yeah.
They're giving a bunch of loopholes to the people
Yeah.
that are in charge, and it's not the common man, it's the people that are going to be making the
Yeah.
most amount of revenue off of these deals.
I guess simply put, when you look at the ins and outs of all of it, we're being fleeced. I mean,
100%.
we as public citizens are being fleeced.
Yeah. And one of the things
So,
like I keep thinking about over and over again because it's so far right, so far left, and like that's what's causing the problems, right? Where we need to get back towards the middle where we can all agree on some things. And like for this, like it's okay to be very passionate about public lands, the environment, the health of our water and air and everything else and like uh, want to protect that and then also agree with some of this administration's priorities.
mhm,
Like it doesn't have to be one or the other. I feel like people are so afraid of crossing over. Like I can't say one thing against this because then,
Their
like
ideology.
it's
yeah,
like it's okay, soften up people, protect what you love, keep your value systems in place and you can still support what you want to support, but yeah, I don't know.
yeah, I think we talked about that the last podcast is public lands is something that is bipartisan. I mean, people on both sides of the conservative to liberal schedule or liberal areas of politics both utilize public lands for recreational purposes. So it's something we can come together on, I believe.
Yeah,
So,
I agree.
I have a quote from Walt Whitman about we were talking about the fleecing of the common man. But the genius of the United States is not best or most in its executives or legislators, nor in its ambassadors or authors or colleges or churches or parlors, nor even in its newspapers or inventions or inventors, but always most in the common people. And that really is the public lands are for the common people until they are given away for to become for financial what's the word I'm looking for?
Gain?
Yeah,
Yeah.
financial gain for these higher institutions to basically extract, mine, anything that's going to make these corporations that are going to be doing this large scale work and not actually paying the common people, whether that's in the form of land, environmental impact. It really doesn't kind of make any sense, and it seems bipartisan to me. I mean, if you like clean water, which I think most people do like to drink clean water, and they like to go out in the forest and not see clear cuts everywhere, and it just seems like it's a common people issue, not Republican or not Democrat. So
Well, I think that
yep, I agree.
Genius of the common people too is that there's more of us than there of um our branches of government, and that we have a voice, and if we use that voice for the things we value, and we get enough masses behind us in that effort, we've been able to make change in the past, so why not try again?
Yeah, I think that's what it's going to take is right now we contact our state reps, we let them know our state senators, congress people, write letters, phone calls, do everything you can in that respect. But if it comes down to it, it takes a coalition of masses of people forming protests to make their point get across. I was listening to a segment on one of the shows, 60 Minutes or something like that. No, it was NPR on the radio. Something that's the federal government wants to get out of helping fund, by the way. But
Ironically.
but I actually listened to NPR, and they had somebody that has researched when does protest effectively move the government on that issue. And it wasn't just US, it was worldwide. And they came to a solid figure that if you have 3.5% of the population, that and that 3.5% is made up of a diverse part of the population, meaning rich, poor, various minority groups, white, whatever, that it was a good cross section of the people, that 3.5% figure always led toward a change in the government's policy. And so it does show that, I'd be willing to bet there's more than 3.5% of the population in the United States is for maintaining public property.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we do what we can right now. If we have to do more, we cross that bridge when we get to it.
Yeah.
But I, couple 3 weeks back, I attended a protest with my hands off public land sign, and be honest, first protest I've ever attended. Uh, and there was probably 400, give or take a few people lining the streets. But it was interesting because not only did I see other public land sign, but there were a whole lot of other issues being demonstrated on. But it was interesting how many cars would go by and honk the horns and wave, and just showing support.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome.
if nothing else, it made me feel like sometimes you feel like you're an island alone
Yeah.
in all this until you actually reach out to these other communities and you discover no, there's a lot of people that see some of the same things you're seeing, and
Yeah.
you're not alone. So
Definitely.
I would urge people who have that feeling of maybe being alone in all this and they don't know what to do, not only contact your representatives, but attend these protests, show your willingness to step out of your comfort zone and do that. So,
And I tried to find out when, like, what's the timeline for this type of reconciliation bill to get passed. And I'm not exactly sure I have the right information here, but I'm going to share because it sounds like um, around June 10th, the House Appropriations Committee reports the last annual appropriation bill. June 15th, Congress completes action on reconciliation legislation. And then June 30th, House completes action on an annual appropriation bills. So I don't know if we're looking at a month and a half before this big, beautiful, what do they call it?
Big,
This,
beautiful bill.
yeah, that gets passed. If so, I think that's why I wanted to definitely talk today and let people know what the provisions are and, yeah, just what you can do and
That's probably a pretty good timeline. At least gives you targets for,
yeah. So I mean,
yeah,
obviously the fiscal year for the federal government ends September 30th. So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
definitely coming up here. And so we have a limited amount of time. So if it's something folks care about, yeah, take action now, do everything you can, and yeah, hope for the best, I guess.
I have
Yeah.
another quote from Edward Abbey, who is a great writer, a champion of the environment and public lands. And he said, "A patriot must always be ready to defend the country against his government."
Mm.
kind
Yeah.
kind of seemed fitting for.
Yeah. So is there
Well,
any, go ahead, Tim.
that's how pretty much how our environment has been saved to the degree that it's been saved
Yep.
was through exactly that
Yep.
protest against governmental non-regulations, protesting for regulations on corporations. So, it's just something that we'll be doing in the future, I think.
Yeah, it's hard with public lands. I mean, reading through the history, it sounds like there's it's always been a contentious issue since the
Mhm.
beginning of federal ownership of public land, and it may always be somebody always trying to grab more from it. So yeah, it would be nice if we could get some type of protections in place that were more long term, irreversible,
Yeah.
and yeah, not able to slip in little things here and there to degrade the quality of what we have now.
Yeah. Some safeguards.
Yeah, there you
Yeah.
go. There's the word.
Well, that
Yeah.
that that goes to the whole legality. You had said talked about discussing the legality of the separate branches and how one actually is supposed to offset the other, so that the executive doesn't have control over the legislative and the judicial branch. And this has been going on for a long time. And so what the executive branch right now is trying to do is to slip in these little things at midnight and slide stuff in. But this isn't something that is just in this administration. I mean, just to use it as an example, where this is bipartisan also, Biden used it to nullify the Supreme Court, said that he wasn't able to do the student loan forgiveness. So he went ahead and did the student loan forgiveness, and that actually the taxpayers ended up paying for that. So this is not something that is new to Trump. What Trump and I'm going to throw in Project 2025 are doing right now is they're just moving it forward on steroids. So luckily there is supposed to be checks and balances between these three branches of the government. Now we're starting to find out where the courts are actually starting to catch up with the executive branch, which Trump and all of these people that are actually very well organized. This Project 2025 has been going on since his last term, and they're very calculated in what they're doing, and they're just trying to they call it a blitzkrieg essentially,
That's
and
what Tim brought up last time, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just hammering people so they have no moral fortitude left, and you just have to stand fast and hope that these other branches can come in, and it's a legality fight essentially. So
Yeah. I think right now, the only checks and balances we have going on right now is the judicial branch.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been holding up, and it gives me some hope
Yeah.
that, yeah, yeah, if people look at all the cutting in the federal government in all the various agencies, if they think it's only about cost saving,
It's not.
that's not it. That's not the intent.
Mhm. Yeah.
The intent is in the formation of most authoritarian governments. That's like, I don't know, page 2 or 3 of how to gain that.
Yep.
And it's got your agencies so that you and reduce civil service
Mhm.
so you can put appointed people in those positions that cater to whatever the administration wants,
Yep.
not the mission of the agency. So
John just was reading me something from OMB, Office of Management and Budget. I forget who the head is now, but
Russ Vaught is his name, and he's actually one of the um, key arbitrators of Project 2025, and he's going to be taking over where Elon Musk is leaving the federal government and Doge.
mhm.
He's going to be taking over that position also. But go ahead.
no, go ahead. What did he say?
Um,
He said some interesting
he
stuff
said
about
some
how he's
really,
trying to make federal
yeah.
employees feel.
Um, so here's a quote from his distaste for civil servants, a so-called deep state that prevented Trump from carrying out his full agenda this time is profound. We want the bureaucrats to be traumatically affected, Vaught said in a video obtained by ProPublic and a research group documented in October. When they wake up in the morning, we want them not to want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as villains. We want their funding to be shut down. We want to put them in trauma. So this is what this gentleman said about people that are actually working for the constituents and the common people. What does he think about the people that don't agree with him? And this is somebody that's in charge that is a quote unquote conservative Christian, which is just interesting. It just it doesn't seem that I think well, whatever. That's a whole other. I'm gonna let that go. But
Yeah, it's I no, I'm glad you brought that up though, because again, it's easy to stray off on other topics because
It
there's so
is.
much
There's so much
so
intent.
much
They
that's
all kind of play off
they
of
do
what they
they
did.
do they do relate.
Yeah.
It's just interesting that during the election for an administration that was running for reelection that said they have no knowledge of this 2025, that how much of it is their playbook for their administration.
It
it,
seems
You
it's
like
know,
literally verbatim. I downloaded Project 2025 and I'm
yeah,
showing sections to Anitra. There's a section on the Department of Interior.
we
There's a
haven't
section on
agreed
the
yet.
budget.
Yeah.
yeah.
There, and I'm pages. I mean, these people have been working hard. I will give that to them.
That's what I said. It's
And
very calculated.
they're very calculated and they're pushing their agenda through, but it is very myopic and it isn't encompassing of I'm going to use that common people again of everyone. It's for a certain type of person and that's great, but that again it puts us to where we're at politically where we should be looking more towards the middle and what we have in common and what we can
Mhm.
do, which brings me back to public lands, which everybody has access to and can actually use and utilize for recreation, for spiritual renewing, for whatever you want to call it. It's just something that I think everybody can get on board with. So
Yeah, I want to
Agree.
mention too, because I didn't think of the what you can do. What can you do besides calling your congressman? Um, there are environmental groups that are very good at litigation against the federal government in support of public lands. So you can Google which ones have active lawsuits right now. You can donate to them. You can sign up to help them out with whatever they need. They usually have like an action checklist that, you can, if you're good at writing, you can get on board with that. So I'm trying to think of a couple offhand, like off the top of my head. I know Sierra Club, I believe, is in active litigation, um, as is Earth Justice. Tim, do you know of any others? I'm trying to think.
Uh, off the top of my head, no, but you can easily find them.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
can Google them. There's a number of them.
yeah. The
A
park,
number.
there's one that supports the Park Service that's trying.
Yep.
There's individual ones for like Grand Staircase, Escalante. There's all types of
You
monuments.
have. There's a number of for the hunting and fishing crowd out there that's their utilization of public lands. A number of the hunting and fishing organizations are
Yeah.
also very supportive of public lands, and so
Yeah, and then also I don't know if I mentioned it, but I want to bring that back, going back to the royalty rates about the federal government decreasing the royalty rates. I do think that that's if you do wind up calling your representatives, something worth mentioning that, not only are you supportive of, well, it depends on if you agree with it, but if you agree with it, like not selling off our public lands, taking that off the table, and then for the extractive industries paying their fair share. I mean, we
yep,
all have to pay fair market value for everything. Why shouldn't they? So, just some thoughts there.
I'd also
yep.
like to see that provision for them not to
Oh,
have
yeah,
any
yeah. Oh,
environmental
the court. Yeah, that's got to go too.
recourse.
Oh
That's
my God.
that to me above
That's
all the
scary.
money.
Yeah.
Yeah, if there's no environmental recourse, you're basically giving a free for all for all of these extractive and mining these industries. That's scary. And again, that's what you said, Tim, is that's why these laws were put in place. The EPA, the NEPA, all these laws that
Yeah,
were put in.
that should scare everyone. I mean, the rollback of environmental regulations.
Yeah.
So
All right. Does anyone have anything else to share on this topic? Because we're getting up on an hour. I don't want it to be
yeah,
too long. And then no, you good, Tim? You good?
sure.
I have one more quote I'd
Go
like
ahead.
to read.
Yep.
It's Edward Abbey. Wilderness is not a luxury, but a necessity of spirit, and is vital to our lives as water and good bread. A civilization which destroys what little remains of the wild, the spare, the original, is cutting itself off from the origins and betraying the principle of civilization itself. So that
Yeah.
resonated with me.
Okay.
Yes, yeah,
And
should.
we were wanting to end this podcast with at least one good story, right, of somebody's experience on public lands. And because there's three of us, and I was going to give each of us a chance, but Tim, you've had some wild excursions. I'm going to give it to you this time. Maybe we'll take turns of telling if you have one that comes to mind that yeah, just leave us on a positive note of a really cool experience you've had out on our public
Oh
lands,
man,
call it.
we yeah we talked about it. So it was difficult because I've had so many,
Yeah.
and um, but
Yeah.
for one reason, this one jumped to mind. It was on a antelope hunt in western Wyoming on public lands, and uh, I had headed out on an evening hunt. Gotten a fair distance, and I was hunting right out of camp. I got a fair distance from camp and come up over a rise. And even though I had an opportunity to shoot a buck, I passed on it because I was in a position where I was able to watch the interaction of these antelope running around. It was during the rut, and it was just so interesting watching everything happen down in front of me, almost like I was watching a wildlife show.
Yeah.
And I sat there to the point where it began to get relatively dark, and I still had to hike back to camp. So I pretty much was ended up in the dark hiking back to camp. And as I come up over the last rise, I look down and I can see the tent and somebody in the party's out their back, and the tent is just glowing. And because of the lantern in the tent, and it was dark and everything. And it was like such a good feeling to see that
Mhm.
tent in the distance glowing and everything else dark. It's like I actually sat down because it was like one of those moments where you you, and especially as I get older, I have more of those moments where you realize I might not experience this kind of thing again, and I'm going to absorb as much of it as I can over the next 5, 10 minutes. And I
Mhm.
just sit there and I watch the tent and the darkness enclose around me. And it just, obviously, it made an impact to
Yeah.
me,
Mhm.
that moment. And that's one that came to mind. I could come up with many others, but it would go on for hours. No one wants to listen to me talk that long. So,
That's beautiful. Yeah. No, I think like one of the ones I was thinking of, I actually have all my old journals. And this is like I don't journal normally, but when I'm traveling, that's the time I tend to write about just experiences where we go and stuff. And um I was just gonna read a passage from that. And then it's almost like it's like that moment where you come back into yourself, like where you're out in the wilderness and all of a sudden you just settle back into like just like living you, no distractions, and then just that beautiful peace that comes across you as in your own humanity, which is really cool. So
You were in the zone, Tim.
yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it's as you get older, uh, I'll be doing something, and you realize in the past when you're younger, like, oh yeah, can't wait to do this again. Well, now it's like, are you really going to be back to do this again?
yeah,
There's no guarantees anymore, and probably never has been. But
yeah.
in the youth of your mind, you think that you live forever, kind of thing. But now you realize I'll be turning 70,
Mhm.
which is a bad number because up until 70, I was always able to say, hey, I'm not that old. But when you say 70, it's like you're old. So
I'm starting to think like 70's not that old. Like 80's starting 80's.
yeah, exactly. It used to be
Always
when
get
you
like,
heard, oh, somebody died and they were 75 when you were a youth, you said, oh yeah, well, they lived a long life, didn't they? Now
Yeah.
somewhere around 50, I decided, yeah, oh man, they died kind of young, like 80, 85. That's cool. So, but anyway, you grasp those moments and you try to hang on to them for as long as possible and try to remember them because, you know, someday when you're not able to do whatever the things you normally like to do and you're left with your memories, you hope that those are some that you still cling to. So,
Yeah. And hopefully, if you keep active enough, you can keep doing it till your dying day.
yeah, well, I, uh, I hope my attempt is to be moving when the sand runs out. So that's my goal.
I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And I forgot to mention when I was introducing you last time, Tim, but like it's worth mentioning that Tim is a true uh traveler, expeditioner, like lover of adventure, like a true Lewis and Clark of our time. Like he goes and does like some crazy things for months on end and just keeps planning amazing and
Sure.
yeah, journeys. And yeah, I've just you're an inspiration and I hope
Yes.
to as soon as I have the time to live like you do. So
Yeah,
and
I
yeah.
hope everyone has
Yeah.
time to enjoy that part of our lives. So